The old soldier walked into the lecture hall with a limp he had carried for 30 years. His name was Doran. His scales were faded now, gray where they had once been dark green, and a long crack ran down the left side of his jaw where a piece of shrapnel had hit him a lifetime ago. He wore no medals. He never did. He said once that medals were for soldiers who needed to remember their wars. He could not forget his. The hall was enormous. It was built from black stone and shaped like a ball, with rows of seats rising up in wide circles. Every seat was full. 1,000 young Velhari cadets sat shoulder to shoulder, their fresh green scales still bright, their eyes still sharp and eager and full of the kind of confidence that only came from never having been truly afraid. Doran had been like them once. He barely remembered what that felt like. He reached the platform at the center of the hall and stood behind the thin metal stand. He did not carry notes. He never carried notes. He looked up at the sea of young faces and waited. The whispers died slowly. They always did. The cadets knew who he was, Commander Doran, survivor of the frontier wars. The only Velhari officer who had fought both alongside and against the humans, and had lived long enough to talk about it. He came to the War Academy once a year, always at the start of the new term, and he always gave the same lecture, or so the older instructors said. None of the cadets had heard it before. A tall cadet in the third row raised his hand before Doran had said a single word. Doran looked at him and nodded slowly. "Sir," the cadet said, and his voice was loud and clear and proud. "In your career, you fought against the Kreth Swarm, the Ulari Collective, and the humans. Which enemy was the most dangerous?" There was a stir in the hall. The cadets leaned forward. This was the question everyone wanted to ask, and this young fool had gotten there first. A few of them smirked. They already knew the answer. It had to be the Kreth. Everyone knew the Kreth were the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Their acid could melt through starship armor. Their soldiers felt no pain and no fear. They attacked in waves so thick they blotted out the sky. Or maybe the Ulari. The Ulari were psychic. They could reach into your mind and pull out your worst memory and make you live it again and again until you went mad. Entire Velhari platoons had been found sitting in the dirt, screaming at nothing, because an Ulari monk had broken their minds from a kilometer away. The humans? The humans were soft, small, fragile things with no claws, no scales, no venom, no natural armor of any kind. They bled easily. They broke easily. The Velhari military had classified them as a Class C threat, which was one step above harmless wildlife. Humans looked like something you could snap in half with one hand. Doran did not answer right away. He stood very still behind the stand, and his old yellow eyes moved slowly across the room. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 20. The smirks began to fade. Something about the way the old soldier was standing made the cadets uneasy, though none of them could have said exactly why. Then Doran spoke. He said one word. Humans. The hall erupted. Laughter burst from every row. A cadet in the back actually slapped his knee. Others shook their heads and grinned at each other. Humans. The old commander had finally lost his mind. Humans were the answer to a joke, not a serious question about warfare. Doran did not laugh. He did not smile. He did not move. He stood at the platform and waited for the laughter to die, and it did die, because his face killed it. There was something in his expression that did not belong in a room full of laughter. It was heavy and tired and very, very serious. When the hall was quiet again, Doran slowly rolled up the left sleeve of his uniform. The fabric bunched up around his elbow, and then his forearm was bare, and every cadet in the first 10 rows could see it clearly. A scar. A thick, ugly, ragged scar that started at his wrist and ran all the way up his arm and disappeared under his sleeve at the shoulder. It was deep. Whatever had made that wound had cut through his scales and into the muscle beneath, and had left a mark that 30 years of healing had not been able to smooth away. "A human female gave me this," Doran said. His voice was calm. "She was 160 centimeters tall. She weighed roughly half of what I weigh. She cut me open with a field knife that was shorter than my hand." The hall was silent now. 1,000 cadets held their breath. "She was saving my life when she did it," Doran said. He let that sit for a moment. Then he pulled his sleeve back down and lowered himself into the chair behind the stand. His bad leg made him wince as he bent it, but he said nothing about the pain. He had stopped talking about pain a long time ago. "You laugh because you have never seen a human in battle," Doran said. "I understand. I laughed too the first time I saw one. They are small, they are soft, they have no claws, they have no armor. Their teeth are flat and dull. Their senses are worse than ours in almost every way. On paper, they are one of the weakest species in the galaxy." He paused. "On paper." Another pause, longer this time. "Let me tell you something that is not written in your textbooks. It is not in your training manuals. It is not in the official military records, because the generals who wrote those records were too proud to admit it. But every soldier who has faced a human in combat knows it. Every single one." He leaned forward in his chair. "Humans do not stop." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You can shoot them, you can stab them, you can break their bones and burn their skin, and take their weapons and leave them bleeding in the dirt, and they will get back up. They will crawl if they cannot walk. They will bite if they cannot punch. They will fight you with rocks and sticks and bare hands, and sheer, blinding, unreasonable fury. They do not care that they are smaller. They do not care that they are weaker. They do not care about the odds. Something in them, something deep in their blood and bones, refuses to stop." Doran looked out at the cadets. None of them were smiling now. None of them were whispering. A few of them looked uncomfortable. They should be uncomfortable. "I am going to tell you 4 stories," Doran said quietly. 4 things I saw with my own eyes during the Frontier Wars. When I am done, you will not laugh about humans again. You will not call them Class C. You will not look at their soft skin and flat teeth and think they are weak." He settled back in his chair, and the old scar on his arm ached the way it always did when he thought about her. "Let me tell you about a medic named Una," he said, "and the night she dragged me out of hell." Doran closed his eyes for a moment before he began, and when he opened them, he was no longer in the lecture hall. He was back on Varys Hollow. He could almost smell it, swamp rot and acid smoke and blood. Varys Hollow was a terrible place to fight a war. The whole planet was mud and fog and water that came up to your chest if you stepped in the wrong place. The trees were black and leafless and bent like old men, and the fog was so thick you could not see more than 20 meters in any direction. The Velhari and the humans had been sent there together as allies. The Kreth swarm had taken the planet and was using it as a breeding ground, and if they were not stopped, they would produce enough soldiers to threaten 3 systems. Doran was a young lieutenant then, strong, fast, sure of himself, in the way that young officers always were before their first real fight. His platoon was 40 Velhari soldiers, well-trained and well-armed, and they had been paired with a small human medical team for the operation. He remembered looking at the human medics when they first arrived, and thinking they had been sent to die. They were so small. Their armor was thin. Their weapons were basic. The lead medic was a female named Una, and she barely came up to Doran's chest. She had dark hair pulled back tight behind her head, and calm, steady eyes that looked at everything like she was measuring it. She did not talk much. She checked her supplies, tested her equipment, and nodded once when she was ready. Doran had ignored her. She was not a soldier. She was a medic. She was not important. He told the cadets that this was the first of many times he had been wrong about a human. The ambush came on the second night. The Kreth had been hiding beneath the water. They rose out of the swamp in silence, and by the time the first Velhari soldier screamed, it was already too late. Kreth acid spitters were terrible weapons. They fired biological projectiles that melted through metal and flesh alike. The sound they made when they hit armor was a hiss, like water on hot stone, and then the screaming would start. Doran saw 3 of his soldiers go down in the first 10 seconds. Their chest plates dissolved. The acid ate through to their skin, and then through their skin, and then kept going. The platoon scattered. Discipline collapsed. The fog was too thick, the enemy too close, and the screaming was everywhere. Doran fired his weapon into the fog and hit nothing. He ran. He was not proud of it, but he ran, because staying meant dying. He did not get far. A Kreth projectile struck him in the side, just below his ribs. It punched through his armor and lodged deep in his body, and he could feel the acid immediately. It was warm at first, almost gentle, and then it began to burn. It was a slow, grinding, relentless burn that got worse with every heartbeat. The acid was eating him from the inside. He fell. The mud swallowed him up to his shoulders, and the fog closed over him like a blanket, and he lay there in the dark and the wet and the pain, and he thought very clearly that he was going to die. Velhari field doctrine was simple in situations like this. If a soldier fell and could not be moved safely, you left them. You preserved the unit. You did not risk the living for the dying. It was logical. It was efficient. It was the Velhari way. Then something grabbed his arm and pulled. He was too weak to resist, and too confused to understand what was happening. Something was dragging him through the mud, and it was grunting with effort, and it was far too small to be a Velhari. He felt his body slide over wet ground and then bump against something solid, a fallen tree. And then the pulling stopped. He opened his eyes and saw Yuna. She was covered in mud from head to toe. There was blood on her face and hands, and he later learned it was not her blood. Her left arm hung at a wrong angle. She had dislocated her shoulder, dragging him. She looked down at him with those same calm, steady eyes, and she said, "Stay still." Then she reached up, grabbed her own dislocated arm, and wrenched it back into the socket with a single hard twist. He heard the pop. He saw her face tighten for just 1 second. She did not scream. She did not even close her eyes. She just breathed out once, hard, through her nose, flexed her fingers to test them, and then turned her attention to his wound. She cut his armor away with a field knife. The blade was short and sharp, and she moved with a speed and precision that stunned him. She found the acid projectile buried in his side, and she looked at it for exactly 2 seconds, and then she made a decision that no field manual in any species had ever described. She cut him open. That was where the scar came from. She sliced through his scales and into the muscle with her little knife, opened him up like she was gutting a fish, and reached in with her bare hands and pulled the acid projectile out of his body. Her fingers blistered and burned from the acid. She did not stop. She tossed the projectile into the mud, grabbed a plasma torch from her belt, and cauterized the wound shut. The pain was beyond anything Doran had ever felt. He roared. She put her knee on his chest to keep him still, and kept working. Then she did something impossible. She pulled 2 medical kits from her pack, 1 human and 1 Velhari, and she mixed their contents together. She had studied Velhari biology on her own time, something no one had asked her to do, and she had worked out a combination of drugs that could slow acid damage in Velhari tissue. She injected him. The burning began to fade. While she was injecting him, a sound came from the fog to their left. A clicking, rattling sound. Kreth. Yuna did not look up from what she was doing. Her left hand kept working on Doran's wound. Her right hand drew her sidearm from her hip, pointed it into the fog without looking, and fired 3 times. The clicking stopped. Something heavy fell into the water. She holstered the weapon and went back to stitching him shut. Doran stared at her. Through the pain and the shock and the fog of blood loss, he stared at this tiny human creature who had dragged him through the mud with a dislocated shoulder, cut him open with a pocket knife, burned his wound shut, invented medicine on the spot, and killed a Kreth soldier without even looking up from her work. "Why?" he whispered. His voice was weak and rough. "Why did you come back for me?" She was tying off a stitch. She did not look at him. "You are my patient," she said, as if that explained everything. And to her, Doran realized, it did. Doran paused in the lecture hall. The cadets were staring at him. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "She carried me for 2 kilometers after that," Doran said quietly. "Through Kreth territory, in the dark, with burned hands and a shoulder that had been torn out of its socket and put back in. She carried a soldier who weighed 3 times what she did. And she did not stop, and she did not complain, and when we reached the extraction point, she set me down and went back into the fog to look for more wounded." He let the silence fill the hall. "Your textbooks say humans are fragile," he said. "Your classification system says they are a minor threat. I am telling you now that I have watched a human woman, smaller than any of you, pull a melting projectile out of my body with her bare hands, and then kill an enemy soldier without breaking her concentration. She did not do this because I was her friend. She did not do this because she was ordered to. She did it because something inside her would not let a wounded creature die if she could stop it." He touched his arm where the scar lay hidden beneath his sleeve. "Humans do not leave their wounded behind," he said. "Not their own, not their allies, sometimes not even their enemies. You may think this is weakness. You may think this is foolish. But let me tell you what it really is." He looked at them with his old, tired, yellow eyes. "It is the reason they are still alive as a species, and it is the reason you should never, ever fight them. Because a species that will walk into hell to save 1 life will burn the whole galaxy down to save 1,000. He let the words settle. Then he leaned back. "But that is only the first story," he said. "Let me tell you about a man named Teho, and what 32 humans did against 6,000. Doran said that the second story was different from the first. The first story was about mercy. The second was about something harder. He said the cadets needed to understand that humans did not just save lives. They also held lines. And when a human decided to hold a line, the galaxy itself could not move them. He had been sent to Outpost Korra as a military observer. The Valhari Empire had no stake in the conflict there. It was a small moon, rocky and dry, orbiting a gas giant at the edge of contested space. A refugee colony had been built into the caves and valleys of the moon's surface, home to roughly 40,000 civilians from a dozen different species. They were farmers, workers, families. They had nothing of military value. They had come to Korra because no one else wanted it. But a mercenary warlord named Grath wanted it. Grath was Pelori, a massive, heavy-boned species known for cruelty and greed. He had built an army of 6,000 soldiers from the dregs of a dozen worlds, and he wanted Korra because the moon sat on top of a vein of rare minerals worth more than some planets. The civilians were in his way. He did not plan to move them. He planned to kill them. The only military force on Korra was a single platoon of human soldiers, 32 men and women under the command of Sergeant Teho. Doran had read Teho's file before arriving. It was thin. Teho was not famous. He was not decorated. He was a quiet man from a quiet place, and his service record was ordinary in every way. He had never commanded anything larger than a platoon. He had never fought a major battle. There was nothing in his file that suggested he was anything special. Doran told the cadets that files were useless when it came to humans. You could read everything ever written about a human and still have no idea what they were capable of until you watched them face the impossible. Doran arrived at Korra 3 days before the mercenary fleet appeared in orbit. He watched the human soldiers prepare. They did not have much. Standard infantry weapons, some explosives, basic field equipment. The colony had mining tools and kitchen supplies, and not much else. Against them was coming a force almost 200 times their number, with heavy weapons, armored vehicles, and air support. He expected the humans to call for evacuation. There was still time. They could load the civilians onto transport ships and leave before Grath arrived. It would mean abandoning the colony, but the people would survive. It was the logical choice. It was what any sane commander would do. Tejo did not call for evacuation. He called a meeting. Doran stood at the back of the room and watched. Tejo stood in front of his 32 soldiers, and he was not what Doran expected. He was average height, average build, with a plain face and short dark hair, and eyes that were very calm and very still. He did not look like a hero. He did not look like a leader. He looked like someone who repaired machines for a living. He spoke quietly. He told his soldiers the situation. 6,000 mercenaries, heavy weapons, no reinforcements for at least 4 days, 32 of them, 40,000 civilians behind them. The math was bad. He did not pretend it was anything else. Then he said 5 words. They do not get past us. That was all. No grand speech, no roar, no fire in his voice, just 5 quiet words spoken by a quiet man. And every single soldier in that room nodded. Some of them closed their eyes for a moment. One woman at the back took a slow breath and let it out. But not one of them argued. Not one of them hesitated. Not one of them looked for the door. Doran said he did not understand it at the time. In the Velhari military, a commander facing those odds would be expected to make the rational choice. Retreat. Regroup. Preserve your forces for a fight you can win. Dying for nothing was not bravery. It was stupidity. But the humans did not see it as dying for nothing. They saw 40,000 people who would be slaughtered if they ran. And so they did not run. The mercenary army landed the next morning. They came in waves, confident, loud, already celebrating a victory they thought was guaranteed. Grath himself broadcast a message to the colony telling them to surrender. He promised a quick death. It was more than he usually offered. Tejo did not respond to the message. He was too busy setting traps. The humans had spent every hour since the meeting turning Korra into a nightmare. Hajun, the demolition specialist, was a young man with a wide smile and steady hands, who hummed songs while he wired explosives. He had taken the colony's mining charges and combined them with kitchen chemicals and scrap metal and built devices that were not in any manual. He planted them in the canyon approaches, in the cave tunnels, under the landing pads, and in places that looked like safe ground but were not. The first wave of mercenaries entered the main canyon at dawn. 400 soldiers in heavy armor, moving fast and careless. Hajun pressed a button. The canyon walls came down on them. Rock and fire and twisted metal fell in a roaring avalanche that buried 200 soldiers in seconds. The survivors stumbled out of the dust, stunned and bleeding, and walked directly into a crossfire the humans had set up at the canyon mouth. 60 more fell before they retreated. Grath sent a second wave, a third, a fourth. Each time, the humans had prepared something different. False retreat paths that led into kill zones, tunnels that collapsed when triggered, frequencies broadcasting the sounds of heavy armor and large troop movements, making the mercenaries believe the colony had 10 times more defenders than it did. Grath's scouts reported seeing enemy forces everywhere. There were no enemy forces. There were 32 humans who moved fast and hit hard, and then vanished like ghosts. On the second day, Taeho took a plasma bolt through the thigh. The shot burned through muscle and stopped against bone. He fell. His soldiers ran to him. He waved them away, wrapped the wound himself with a strip torn from his shirt, and kept giving orders from the ground. When a medic tried to pull him to cover, he said, "I can see the field better from here." On the third day, Ha-jun was planting charges in a side tunnel when a mercenary grenade came through the entrance. The explosion took his left arm off below the elbow. Doran was close enough to hear it happen. He heard the blast. He heard a short, sharp scream, and then he heard nothing for a few seconds, and he thought the human was dead. Then Ha-jun walked out of the tunnel. His left arm ended in a torn, bleeding stump. His face was white. His jaw was clenched so hard the muscles stood out like ropes. He looked down at where his arm used to be, and he said something quiet that Doran did not catch. Then he pulled his belt off with his remaining hand, tied it around the stump to stop the bleeding, picked up a detonator, and went back to work. With one hand. He planted 4 more charges that day. By the 4th day, only 9 humans were still standing. They were wounded, exhausted, starving, and low on everything. Doran had stopped recording his observations. He had picked up a weapon and was fighting alongside them, because he could not watch them die alone. He did not tell his superiors this. He did not care. But Grath's army was broken, not in numbers. He still had over 3,000 soldiers, but his soldiers had lost something that numbers could not replace. They had lost their belief that they could win. 2,800 of their comrades were dead. Every attack had been met with something unexpected. Every safe route was a trap. Every silence was a prelude to an explosion. The humans were ghosts. The humans were everywhere and nowhere. The humans would not stop, and would not fall, and would not give up. And it did not matter how many you killed, because the ones who were left just fought harder. The mercenary soldiers began to refuse orders. Squad leaders reported that their troops were shaking, not from cold, from fear. 6,000 soldiers were afraid of 9 wounded humans. Reinforcements arrived on the morning of the 5th day. A human battlecruiser dropped out of orbit and deployed 300 fresh troops. Grath's army surrendered within the hour. The warlord himself fled and was captured 2 weeks later, hiding in a cargo container on a trade station. Taeho was carried out on a stretcher. He was barely conscious. His leg wound had become infected, and he had lost more blood than a human body should have been able to lose and still function. The medics who treated him said he should have died on the 2nd day. He had fought for 2 more days after that. As they carried him past Doran, Taeho opened his eyes. They were glassy and unfocused, but he looked up and he asked one question. Are the civilians safe? Not did we win, not how many did we lose. His first thought, his only thought, after 4 days of impossible war, was whether the people behind him were still alive. Doran told the cadets that he had seen Kreth berserkers who felt no pain. He had seen Ulari death monks who welcomed their own destruction. None of them had ever frightened him the way those 9 humans had. Because the Kreth fight, because they are built to fight, he said. The Ulari fight because their faith tells them to. But those humans fought because they chose to. They looked at the numbers, and the numbers told them they would die. And they said, good, then we will die here, and they meant it. There is nothing more dangerous in this universe than a creature that has already accepted its own death and fights anyway. He was quiet for a moment. Now, let me tell you about the mind that almost destroyed our empire. A woman named Sujin. Doran said the 3rd story was the one that still kept him awake at night. Not because of blood, not because of pain, but because it was the story of a human who had beaten the entire Velhari Empire without ever picking up a weapon. The alliance between humans and Velhari had ended 2 years after the Battle of Varus Hollow. The reasons were political, complicated, and in Doran's opinion, stupid. Border disputes, trade disagreements, wounded pride on both sides. The diplomats failed, and the generals took over, and within 6 months the two species were at war. The Velhari expected to win quickly. They had the larger fleet, they had better ships, they had more soldiers, more resources, and more experience. The humans were tough, yes, everyone knew that after Varus Hollow and Korra. But toughness was not enough against superior numbers and technology. The war would be over in a year, 2 at most, and for most of those 7 years, the Velhari lost. Doran had been promoted to field commander by then. He led a battle group attached to the 6th Fleet, the pride of the Velhari Navy. 30 warships, 12,000 soldiers, the finest crews and the best captains in the Empire. They were sent to break the human defensive line along the outer reach, and they expected to cut through it like a blade through water. They were wrong. The first engagement was a disaster. Doran's battle group jumped into a system that intelligence had marked as lightly defended. Instead, they found a minefield so dense it destroyed 2 ships before they could react. The surviving ships retreated into what their navigators identified as a safe corridor, and it turned out to be a kill zone. Human torpedo boats were waiting behind asteroid cover, and they hit the Velhari ships from angles that should have been impossible. He had not fired a single shot. The same thing happened across the entire front. Every move the Velhari made was anticipated. Every strategy was countered before it began. The 6th Fleet would identify a weak point in the human line and send a strike force to exploit it. And the weak point would vanish. The strike force would arrive to find empty space. And then human ships would appear behind them, where no ship should have been, and the killing would start. The Velhari admirals were baffled. They began to suspect the humans had developed psychic technology, some device that could read Velhari thoughts and predict their plans. They spent millions searching for it. They found nothing, because it did not exist. What existed was Sujin. Doran did not learn her name until after the war. During the war, Velhari intelligence called her the Whisper, because her influence was everywhere, but she herself was invisible. She was a human intelligence officer, and she was the architect of nearly every major human victory in the last 4 years of the conflict. Sujin did not read minds. She did something worse. She read cultures. She had spent years before the war studying the Velhari. Not just their military, everything, their history, their religion, their poetry, their philosophy, the way their families were structured, the way their children were raised, the stories they told each other at night. She learned the Velhari language fluently, all 3 dialects, including the ancient ceremonial tongue that most Velhari themselves could not speak. She read their sacred texts. She studied their art. And from all of this, she built a map of how the Velhari thought. Not what they would do, but why they would do it. She understood their instincts, their blind spots, their pride, and their fears. She knew which choices a Velhari commander would make, not because she could predict the future, but because she understood the deep hidden patterns that shaped Velhari decision-making at every level. This was more dangerous than any weapon. She designed Operation Blackthorn, and Doran told the cadets it was the most elegant and devastating military operation he had ever seen. It had 3 parts, and each part used the Velhari's own nature against them. First, she planted false intelligence. She created fake communications, fake documents, and fake informants that all pointed to the same lie. One of the Velhari's most respected admirals, a hero of 3 wars, was secretly negotiating with the humans. The evidence was perfect. It was layered and detailed, and came from sources the Velhari trusted completely. And it worked, because Sujin knew something about Velhari culture, that most Velhari never thought about consciously. She knew that the Velhari honored loyalty above all things, which meant they feared betrayal above all things. The accusation was like a poison dropped into water. It spread through the fleet in days. The admiral was arrested. His captains split into factions, those who believed he was guilty and those who did not. The Sixth Fleet, the most powerful fighting force in the Empire, began to tear itself apart from within. Ships that should have been hunting humans were instead facing each other across tense standoffs. Officers who should have been planning attacks were instead writing accusations and defenses. The fleet was paralyzed. Second, she exploited the Velhari Code of Honor. Velhari military law required that any warship receiving a civilian distress signal must respond. It was one of their oldest and most sacred rules. Sujin set up dozens of automated beacons across the sector, each one broadcasting fake distress calls from civilian ships in danger. She spaced them carefully, each one pulling a Velhari warship or patrol group away from its assigned position. The Velhari captains had no choice. Their code demanded they respond. To ignore a distress call was a crime punishable by death. One by one, the pieces of the Sixth Fleet were scattered across the sector like seeds in the wind, and into the gaps they left, the human ships moved. Third, she sent Miso. Miso was a pilot, and Doran paused when he said her name, because even 30 years later, what Miso did was difficult to describe without sounding like a lie. There was an asteroid corridor between two systems that Velhari navigators had designated as impassable. The corridor was dense with spinning rocks, gravitational anomalies, and debris fields that shifted unpredictably. No ship larger than a shuttle could survive passage through it. The Velhari knew this. Their computers had modeled it 1,000 times. They did not bother to guard it. Miso took a squadron of 12 frigates into the corridor. The ships were already damaged from previous fighting. Several had cracked hulls. One was missing half its engine assembly. She flew them through anyway. Doran said he later watched the flight recordings, and he still did not fully understand how she did it. She navigated by instinct, making adjustments faster than her ship's computer could calculate, threading through gaps that closed seconds after she passed through them. She lost 2 ships. The crews ejected before impact and were recovered later. The remaining 10 frigates emerged on the other side of the corridor, directly behind the Velhari main fleet. Nobody was expecting them. Nobody was looking in that direction. The asteroid corridor was impassable. Everyone knew that. Miso's squadron hit the Velhari flagship from behind. They crippled its engines, destroyed its communication array, and knocked out its shields in under 3 minutes. The rest of the human fleet, waiting on the other side of the sector where Sujin had guided them, attacked at the same moment. Doran's cruiser took a hit in the opening seconds. The bridge lost power. The lights went out. The artificial gravity failed. He floated in the dark among sparks and broken glass, and the moaning of wounded crew. And through his emergency radio, he picked up a human transmission. It was Sujin's voice. He recognized it later when he heard intercepted recordings. She was calm. Not cold, not robotic, but calm the way a surgeon is calm when the patient is open on the table. She was coordinating the entire battle, adjusting positions, redirecting ships, responding to the Velhari's every attempt to regroup with a counter that was already in place before the attempt began. Every possible Velhari response had been anticipated. Every escape route was blocked. Every rally point was already targeted. She had not just planned one battle. She had planned every version of the battle that could possibly happen, and she moved between them like a musician switching between songs. The Sixth Fleet was shattered that day. 12 warships destroyed, 9 captured, the rest scattered. It was the worst defeat in Velhari naval history, and it had been designed by a single human woman who had never fired a shot. Doran looked at the cadets. "We thought humans were primitive because they fight with emotion, he said. We believed that feeling things deeply made them weak, made them irrational, made them easy to predict. He shook his head slowly. We were fools. Humans feel everything. They feel rage and grief and love and fear more deeply than any species I have known. But they do not drown in it. They use it. A human who fights with passion and thinks with precision is the most dangerous thing in this galaxy. Sujin loved her people so fiercely that she spent years learning everything about us so she could protect them. Miso flew through an impossible corridor because she believed, truly believed, that she could do it. Belief is a weapon that no amount of technology can match. He paused. I have one more story, he said. And it is the reason the Velhari Empire, for the first time in its history, chose peace. Doran said the last story was not about a battle. It was about what came after. The war ended not with a surrender, but with a ceasefire. The Velhari Empire had not been conquered, and the humans had not been beaten, and after 7 years of bleeding, both sides were tired enough to stop. The diplomats came back, papers were signed, ships were pulled from the front lines, and for the first time in nearly a decade, there was silence in the space between the two civilizations. Doran was chosen as part of a diplomatic envoy sent to Earth. He did not want to go. He had spent years fighting humans, years watching them kill his friends and destroy his ships, and the thought of standing on their homeworld made something cold twist in his stomach. But he was ordered, and he went. He told the cadets that he expected to find a fortress. He expected bunkers, orbital defense platforms, walls, a civilization built around war, because that was what the humans had shown him. 7 years of relentless, grinding, impossible warfare. A species that would not stop, would not break, would not give in. He expected their home to look like a clenched fist. He was wrong. Again. The human shuttle brought him down through clouds and sunlight, and the first thing he saw was a river. It was wide and slow and green, and there were trees along its banks with white flowers that caught the wind and scattered like snow. There were buildings, yes, tall ones made of glass and steel, but between them there were parks. Green spaces full of grass and benches and fountains. Children were playing on the grass, small human children, running and shouting and laughing, and the sound of their laughter drifted up through the shuttle's open vents and hit Doran in the chest like a fist. He had killed their kind had killed his, and here were their children, playing in the sun, as if the war had never happened. The shuttle landed at a diplomatic center near the city's edge. There were ceremonies, handshakes, speeches. Doran endured them all with a stiff back and a carefully blank expression. But between the formal events, he was allowed to walk the streets, accompanied by a human escort, who answered his questions politely and did not seem uncomfortable being near a Velhari. He saw things he did not expect. Restaurants where humans of different colors and shapes and sizes sat together and talked and ate and laughed. Markets where they sold fruit and fabric and small painted objects that served no military purpose at all. A building where young humans were learning to make music. And through the open windows, he could hear a sound so strange and beautiful that he stopped walking and stood on the sidewalk and listened until the song was over. He saw an old human woman painting a picture on the street, a picture of the river he had seen from the air. She painted slowly and carefully, and the colors on her canvas were soft and warm, and when she noticed Doran watching, she smiled at him. She smiled at the alien soldier, at the enemy. Doran said he almost could not bear it. But the moment that broke him, the moment that changed everything he understood about humans, came on the third day. The diplomatic team had arranged a visit to a small town outside the city. It was a quiet place with narrow streets and low houses and gardens everywhere. The humans there grew vegetables and kept animals and lived simply, Doran was told that many of them were former soldiers, men and women who had fought in the war and come home and chosen to live like this. That was where he met Junwoo. Junwoo was a name Doran had heard during the war. He was a sniper, one of the best the humans had ever produced. During the siege of Barren Point, Junwoo had held a single position for 11 days, without sleep, without food, without resupply. He lay in a hole in the ground on a frozen rock at the edge of a dead system, and he watched through his scope, and he waited, and he shot. Over 200 confirmed kills in 11 days. Valhari officers, Kreth scouts, mercenary commanders. He removed them one by one with a patience that was beyond anything any alien species considered biologically possible. The Valhari soldiers at Barren Point had called him the Eye. They said he was not human. They said he was a machine built to look like one. No living creature could be that still for that long. Doran expected to meet a monster. A cold, empty thing with dead eyes and steady hands. A creature shaped by killing into something that was no longer fully alive. Junwoo was sitting on the porch of a small wooden house. He was older now, with gray in his dark hair and lines around his eyes and mouth. He was wearing simple clothes, brown and green, the kind a farmer might wear. His feet were bare. On his lap was a notebook, and in his hand was a pencil, and he was drawing. He was drawing birds. Small, careful, detailed sketches of the birds that lived in the trees around his house. He had dozens of pages filled with them. Wings spread in flight, heads turned at angles, tiny feet gripping branches. The drawings were gentle and patient, and full of a quiet attention that Doran recognized. It was the same attention that had made Junwoo the most lethal sniper in the war. The same focus, the same stillness, but now it was pointed at birds instead of skulls. Junwoo looked up when Doran approached. His eyes were not dead. They were warm and a little tired and very, very human. He looked at Doran's uniform, at his rank insignia, at the scars on his face, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Not of Doran personally, but of what Doran was. A soldier. Someone who had been where Junwoo had been. He nodded once, slowly. Then he said, "Would you like some tea?" Doran sat down. The chair was small and creaked under his weight, but it held. Junwoo poured tea into 2 cups. The cups were clay, rough and simple, and the tea was pale gold and smelled like cut grass. Junwoo's hands as he poured were steady, perfectly steady. The same hands that had ended hundreds of lives were now pouring tea for the enemy with a gentleness that made Doran's chest ache. They sat together for a long time. They did not talk much. They drank tea and listened to the birds and watched the shadows move across the garden. And the silence between them was not hostile or tense, but simply quiet. The way it is quiet between 2 people who have both seen things that words cannot carry. After a while, Junwoo looked at the garden and said, "I hope my grandchildren never have to learn what I know." That was all. 1 sentence. He did not say it with anger or bitterness or self-pity. He said it the way you might say that you hoped it would not rain tomorrow. A simple, honest wish spoken to the air. Doran told the cadets that this was the moment he understood humans. Not on the battlefield, not in the war room, not watching them fight and bleed and refuse to die. He understood them on a porch in a small town, drinking tea with a killer who drew birds. He stood up from his chair in the lecture hall. His bad leg protested, and he gripped the edge of the stand for a moment until the pain passed. "This is why we signed the peace," he said. "Not because they beat us, though they did. Not because they outsmarted us, though they did. Not because we were afraid of them, though we were." He looked out at the 1,000 young faces staring up at him. "We signed the peace because we realized that we could never truly defeat them. You can burn their cities, they will rebuild them. You can kill their soldiers, more will come. You can destroy everything they have, and they will stand in the ashes and they will mourn, and they will bury their dead, and they will plant seeds in the rubble. And within a generation there will be gardens again, and children laughing again, and music again. His voice was rough now, and he did not try to hide it. A species that can wage war the way humans wage war, that can fight with that much fury and endurance and brilliance, and then choose to stop, choose to sit in a garden, choose to draw birds, choose to pour tea for the enemy. That species cannot be conquered. Not by us, not by anyone. Because you are not fighting their army, you are fighting their nature. And their nature is to survive, and to build, and to hope. And you cannot bomb hope out of existence, no matter how many ships you send. He straightened up. The lecture hall was so silent that the hum of the lights overhead was the loudest sound in the room. The humans have a saying, Doran said. They say, we do not want war, but if you bring war to us, we will be the last ones standing. I have seen this with my own eyes. I carry the proof in my skin. They are not a Class C species. They are not a Class A species. They are something our system was never built to measure. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and draped it over his arm. He looked at the cadets one last time. Pray you never have to fight them, he said quietly. And if you do, pray they show you the same mercy they showed us. He turned and walked toward the exit, limping the way he always limped, and the hall was silent behind him. 1,000 cadets sat in their seats and said nothing, and thought about soft skin, and flat teeth, and small hands that could stitch wounds, and plant bombs, and pour tea, and draw birds. Near the back of the hall, a young cadet opened his datapad. His hands were shaking slightly, and he did not know why. He scrolled to the species classification database, found the entry for humans, and looked at the designation for a long time. Class C, minor threat, low priority. He deleted it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, he typed a single word, and saved the file, and closed the datapad, and sat in the silence with everyone else. The word was unclassifiable.